Welcome to the Setzer Church Leaders podcast, where we're helping Christian leaders lead and navigate through the cultural issues of our day. My name's Daniel Yang, the director of the Church Multiplication Institute, and today we're talking with Phil Vischer. Phil's an animator, writer, voice actor, and director known for co-creating VeggieTales, voicing dozens of its characters, including Bob the Tomato. In 2012, Phil and Sky Jitani launched the Holy Post podcast, which has since expanded to a diverse media resource, helping believers live faithfully in an increasingly post-Christian culture. And Ed's conversation with Phil went a little longer than normal, got a little animated in the second half, so we're splitting this thought-provoking conversation into two parts. We hope you'll join us next week for part 2, where Phil discusses his struggles with modern evangelicalism and explains why he engages with it the way he does. Now let's go to Ed Stetzer, the editor-in-chief of Outreach Magazine and the dean of the Talbot School of Theology.
All right, so Phil Vischer, I told my daughter that I was talking to, and they all get all so excited. That one time you were on the radio with me and you did a shout out to my daughter. She actually tells all her friends that she had a shout out from Bob the Tomato. But we're glad you're here. And again, a lot of people know you for Holy Post, and we're going to get to that. But I want to kind of come back a little bit and kind of share people a little bit of your journey. I know you told the story lots, but maybe not everyone in the world has heard this story.
Maybe not.
And of course, you wrote a book on your story too. I'll mention that in just a minute. But talk to us a little bit about your journey. Most of us first got to know you in VeggieTales days, but tell us the journey.
Yeah, starting where? Birth. I was born in Muscatine, Iowa, at the Muscatine General Hospital.
Let's fast forward. Let's fast forward to that point, and let's start talking about, as a young adult, you start getting into some of the things you begin to do creatively.
I was always a creative kid. I loved playing with cameras, and I learned stop motion animation when I was like 9 years old, and just playing around. And I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I also grew up in church, 4 generations, Christian Missionary Alliance, back on both sides of my family, going all the way back to my great-grandfather, who sang at A.B. Simpson's funeral and was a good friend of his, and was the first non-denominational radio preacher in America. In case you were keeping score, was my great-grandfather. So I had this kind of amazing pedigreed evangelical legacy history that had a heavy focus on what's the big thing you've done for the kingdom? How much impact have you had for the kingdom? So I kind of grew up with this kingdom impact mindset. So when I was making films, because I didn't want to be a pastor or missionary, because I was a shy kid, I like to play with puppets and Legos and stop motion animation. I finally settled on, I think the impact I could have for the kingdom is filmmaking. And I also like computers. I was kind of the first generation of kids that had, they were starting to put computer labs into high schools. They put a computer lab in my high school, and you could actually take classes on computers. And that was very, very new. So I grew up with filmmaking and computers and ministry. And so wouldn't you know it, I made the first computer animated ministry. Which, of course,
was it like the first? Was that really the first?
Well, it was the first. I mean, the first VeggieTales video came out 2 years before Toy Story, so we were 2 years ahead of Pixar in terms of getting something into the market. It was the first home video series that was ever computer animated.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And everyone had them. I mean, it was like every what was, I know that you did some market study, like what percentage of American homes with children had?
At one point, there was a survey that said 1/3 of American homes where young children are present have purchased at least one VeggieTales video.
Wow. And if you added up the number we had purchased, it would be a lot more than one. And by the way, Phil tells a lot of the story in his book, Me, Myself, and Bob, A True Story About Dreams, God, and Talking Vegetables. That's in 2008. And of course, the podcast, you share bits and pieces of this sort of along the way. Okay. So, but then it all kind of comes crashing down.
Crash, burn. So in the year 2000, I had 210 employees working on VeggieTales. We were the largest animation studio in between the coasts. And we'd just been named by Animation Magazine one of 10 studios to watch in global animation. And I'd just been named in a PBS special, one of 10 people to watch in worldwide religion. Wow. So, I was like, wow, how do you like that, great grandpa? Look at me. Look at my impact. And 2 years later, we were in bankruptcy court because I'd overspent, I'd overexpanded, I'd tried to do too much, too fast. Got out. There's a phrase, got out over your skis. Have you ever gotten out over your skis, Ed?
I have. I'm about to go to Biola University at Talbot. Maybe I'm about to be out over my skis. I don't know, but I've definitely been over my skis in the past. That's true.
Literally,
Yes.
literally, because you end up with a face plant in the snow.
That's true.
And that happened in 2003, the end of 2003. All the assets of Big Idea and VeggieTales were sold in a bankruptcy auction, and the new owners didn't offer me a job. They offered me a long distance consulting arrangement. And I could do some writing from a distance, and I could give notes from a distance. But
I have occasionally seen you tweet about that. And
yes,
so that's still a distance. There's still a distance.
At this point, the distance has become infinite.
There's no way to express how far this distance actually. It's to infinity and beyond.
Yes, I'm no longer asked to do anything with VeggieTales, and no one's really doing anything with VeggieTales anymore because they don't know what to do. It's just hard to make money in kids media these days for anyone. And then if you put the constraint of, and it's kind of religious, that just shrinks the funding possibilities down even further. So there's not a whole lot happening with VeggieTales. I had to transition to puppets and did the What's in the Bible series as a way to walk kids through the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation. But it had to be, a tenth of the kind of budgets we had on VeggieTales. Yep. So it was puppets with a mix of animation. And then after that, and that was when there were still Christian bookstores and still DVDs. So
I remember those days. I used to work at one of those places. So,
yes. So then once all the Christian bookstores went away and once DVDs went away, it's like, okay, now how do you do this? And it's, through platforms like whether it's PureFlix or Right Now Media, or like who has a platform that wants something that I could make and might have positive cash flow. And in the Christian world, that's pretty small. It's pretty small. It's slim pickings.
Slim pickings at the moment. I know.
So I've been making. Yes. What?
You don't even remember that back in the day, I used to have a TV program and I had you on, and we talked about Buck Denver and the Bible stuff and all this sort of stuff. And one of the things I thought was interesting at that time is you had a bit of a theological turn in what you wanted to do in your subsequent creations of your animation, your creation, your stuff. And tell us a little bit about where the difference theologically would be from where VeggieTales was to What's in the Bible, Buck Denver, and things of that sort.
Yeah, it was probably more. It may have been more practical than like my personal theology didn't change, but I kind of looked back and realized.
And we're gonna get to that in a minute, but go ahead.
Yes, my personal theology did not change, but I looked back and thought, with VeggieTales, did I just spend 10 years trying to persuade kids to behave Christianly without actually explaining to them Christianity?
Right.
And that was the motivation for What's in the Bible. It's like, it doesn't do any good, just to say, hey, kids, be forgiving because Bible says so. And some kids that will come easy to them, and some kids that will come very hard to them, and they'll feel bad about themselves. And I realize, and unless I explain kind of the whole process of sanctification and the Holy Spirit and the life of Jesus, and not only why we do this, but how we do this, because it's not our own power that makes it possible. Unless I can explain all that, I think I'm doing kids a disservice by just telling them to straighten up and fly straight. So that's led to all the work I've done since then. Is really let's dive deep into the Bible. It's very easy in children's ministry to cherry pick the most exciting Bible stories, teach them to kids, and believe we've taught them the faith. And we haven't. We've given them a few snapshots, out of a movie without letting them watch the whole movie and see the whole story. So that's what I've been trying to do since.
And I love that. Okay, so can you tell us about any projects you're doing? And we're going to get to Holy Post in just a minute, but any projects you're doing in this space now? Give us some hints.
Yeah, I've done a bunch with Right Now Media. If you subscribe to Right Now Media or have access to Right Now Media.
Who doesn't subscribe to Right Now Media?
Well, it's churches only. It's churches only. So you have to be a church. Does. Yeah. So then you have access for free. And I've done family devotionals. I've done a bunch of stuff there, which has been fun. I'm trying to figure out how to get back into real storytelling, because it's much less expensive to hold up a puppet and explain Philemon than it is, to tell a half an hour, 40 minutes exciting story. Yeah. But it's the exciting stories that engage kids' hearts much more readily than a pontificating puppet on a stick talking about, a book of the Bible. So I'm hoping to be able to go back more into storytelling, as the economics are such a huge hurdle that I'm trying to crack the economic nut first so that I can see if I can, bring kids back into really good faith-filled storytelling.
I like that. So when you look kind of today, there's some more creative things that have come out, but they're on different platforms.
Yep.
I'm guessing, The Chosen or for that matter, even the success of things like Jesus Revolution, different means of, I'm part of the He Gets Us stuff. You guys had a conversation about that on the podcast as well.
No, we didn't. We loved it.
Yeah, you did have I saw you mention it. You had a conversation about it.
I know we did. We were a little critical. And
my feelings are not hurt. I mean, that's part of life. So,
okay.
But yeah, and we could talk about that at some point. But so all that being said, there are a lot of people trying different creative things. Do you look at the state of creativity and say, this is better, or is it too packaged? And give us your thoughts about the current state of Christian communication and creativity.
Very little works. And so a whole lot is being invested in the very little.
Interesting.
That makes sense. So the first big successes in Christian movie making were the Kendrick brothers.
Right.
So then there was a lot of money thrown at chasing, let's do things like the Kendrick brothers. And it was kind of discovered that, and they did, Facing the Giants and Fireproof and Courageous. And they had quite a run in the, 2010s. But it was really unique about the storytelling style of the Kendrick brothers. And then the Irwin brothers came along and they started
What's the deal with the brothers? Maybe you need...
I don't know.
I know.
That's why I can't make a good Christian movie, is because I don't have a brother involved. The Irwin brothers came along and they found sort of a different lane.
Yeah.
These lanes are extremely narrow. The Kendrick brothers is you tell a story that sets up a sermon. Sets up and confirms. Basically, you give them the sermon illustration and then you give them the sermon at the end. And that is appealing to a group of people that will show up every time.
Can I just say it was great when we worked at Lifeway, because we could make all the curriculum that kind of flowed right out of that.
Absolutely.
So it was very curriculum oriented.
Each movie is basically a small group Bible study before it gets written out as a movie. Their outlines would work as small group Bible studies. The Irwin brothers found success with, what was their first movie that went big about the song? Remember the song?
I can only imagine.
I can only imagine. Yeah.
It's ironic that I have to tell you the creative things that happen, but whatever.
I sometimes forget things, Ed, because I'm so much older than you.
We are actually 3 months apart in age. We are very close in age. So,
same age, but our hair on top is not the same color. Well, I don't understand why.
Yeah, well, this is all natural. So I don't know what to tell you.
Sure, you keep telling yourself that.
No. It's all now. Trust me, you can fact check it. But go ahead.
Yeah, and the Irwin brothers found a really good lane about telling really inspiring stories that were infused with faith in a fairly organic way. And that's working well, but those are all movies are the only place where you can still get a family to hand you money to hear a single story.
Interesting.
Okay. That doesn't work on TV. It doesn't work on YouTube. It doesn't work anywhere else. So most kids are getting their media from YouTube now. YouTube is the #1 media discovery source for kids, not Nickelodeon, not the Disney Channel, not movies, not anything else, not ABC Saturday morning like when I was a kid. It's YouTube. And the economics of YouTube, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but the economics of YouTube work for people who have billions of views on their channels. Then the economics of YouTube. For everyone else, it's, hey, I had a good video this week. I get to go to Starbucks and buy a coffee. So that just makes, so the experimentation is being done primarily in crowdfunding. The Bible Project, Angel Studios with The Chosen, Angel Studios with Wing Feather, Angel Studios with his only son, the movie that came out a month ago, where they crowdfunded the entire marketing budget after the movie had been made for pennies. So that's the model. It doesn't work well with kids stuff. Angel's trying with Wing Feather, and we'll see if that works. That's the Andrew Peterson series of books that an old friend of mine has turned into an animated series. There seems to be less motivation for paying money for Christian content for kids
Interesting.
than for Christian content for grown-ups. And that's frustrated me for about 20 years.
Okay. So when you look at creatives creating things, creating culture, shaping things, do you look at it and say, we're still in a dearth of this, or we just not have funding models, or do you think there's some good things in the Christian space?
Something interesting happened in the music business, the Christian music business. And, when I was a kid, my parents were going to Andre Crouch concerts and buying love song albums. And then we got into Second Chapter of Acts, and then there was
Hear
Keith
the bells ringing,
they're singing that you can't be. I can
There
sing
you go.
I can
We're
sing their
the
entire
exact
library.
same age, baby. Exact same age. Feeling
Yeah.
that.
So what was interesting is that we watched the life cycle of Christian music go from, experimental outsiders like Larry Norman and Randy Stonehill, with everyone else saying, is this a thing? Can this work? To the adoption of safer voices like Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith that came from the middle of the country, not from California, and weren't hippies.
That's interesting.
Yeah, definitely not a hippie. This is safe. So it was almost closer to Southern gospel. It was
she had her father's eyes too.
And his money, I believe. So they're a very wealthy family. I don't know if you know that. They owned like half the land that is now Brentwood, Tennessee.
I have been to the lodge. I've been to the lodge out there.
To the mountaintop. And then it was discovered that this was actually a business. And so much money came pouring in. Once much money came pouring in, Christian kids and youth groups all across the country said, wait a minute, is that a thing you can actually pursue? And it's like you could even make a living doing that. So the talent pool exploded. Because the talent pool exploded, there was funding to get stuff made. There was a distribution system to get it distributed. Christian music matured very, very quickly. And suddenly you get to, Jars of Clay and Sixpence None the Richer, and you're putting out stuff that is quality-wise is fantastic. That has not happened in movies because it's just too dang expensive. It is so expensive to make a film that can hold up on 3,000 screens across the country, and even more expensive to market a film that can hold up on 3,000 screens across the country, as opposed to going into a studio in Franklin, Tennessee, and cutting an album over a long weekend. That Christian filmmaking just has never had the opportunity to mature. And so you have these little pockets of success, these mini successes, like the Kendrick brothers and the Irwin brothers, who actually are able to build an audience, which usually involves building an email list so that you can tell your fans the new movie is coming. But for kids just growing up, you can't look to a model where if I go to this place or call this company, I can get in the door and start a career. There aren't agents going out and looking for the next hot Christian filmmaker, like agents were looking for the next hot Christian singer, all throughout the 90s and early 2000s.
Sure.
So it is very hard for Christian filmmaking to mature to a level where you could say, oh, I didn't even know that was made by Christian filmmakers. I thought it was just a good movie. I don't know how long it will take to get there, or if we can ever get there.
Interesting. I'm making this move. We're recording this before I've made the move, but by the time this comes out, I'll be over at Biola, and of course the new Snyder School of Cinema and Media Arts.
Yeah,
people are talking about all this sort of stuff,
and that's good.
That's good.
It's a great facility. There still isn't a business model to give the graduates something to do. That's right. Well, I know 10 different Christian colleges that have animation programs.
Right.
Which is wonderful. I mean, they're learning animation. Where do they go when they graduate?
Yeah, in Christian space, though, not as much. But I mean, the graduates there are finding jobs in secular space more so.
Yes,
and there seems to be. So being a good film school in LA, there's
good.
Opportunity that's there, but not
good
in the Christian space so much.
You can work. If your thought is, particularly if your parents in the Midwest, is like, he wants to be a filmmaker. If I send him to Biola, he'll learn how to be a filmmaker, and then he'll get hired by Christians to make Christian movies.
I gotcha. Yeah, I know the director of the film school. My peer is Tom Aline, and he made Mad Men, Breaking Bad, and The Walking Dead. So I'm thinking he's not immediately going to the Christian film space.
No, and you've got guys like Scott Derrickson who who went to Biola and then end up making Doctor Strange. So yeah, there isn't a good model, and I'm not sure what it would be for small scale Christian filmmaking.
Right.
Because small scale filmmaking goes to streaming companies, is funded by streaming companies, and there is no Christian streaming company that is cash positive. So since there's no cash positive Christian streaming company, if you go to a Christian streaming company and say, would you fund my movie? They will say, here's $7,000. Can you give us a 70-minute film? And you can't. So
it sounds that you're concerned about, I mean, you love creatives. You want, because one of the questions I want to ask you is, what should pastors and church leaders say to the creatives in their church so that there's not as much economic opportunity?
Just make stuff. It's never been easier to make stuff. That doesn't mean you're going to make a living at it. So pastoring a small church, be bivocational. Do what you need to do to have health insurance. Like when you go, kids move to New York City all the time because they want to break into the arts, and they work at Starbucks or they waitress or they just have a job. And then people write children's books all the time on the side. Very few people can make a living writing children's books. Maybe 3 in the world can make a living writing children's books. It's not really an occupation, except for Mo, what's his name, just came out of nowhere and wrote a ton of hit children's books. But there is no new Dr. Seuss. That celebrities make all the best-selling children's books. That doesn't mean you can't write children's books. It just means you can't do it and expect it to put you into a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. So either you're living an artist's kind of semi-nomadic lifestyle, or you're bivocational. And that's where, hey, I'm a podcast host and I write children's books and I make, kind of Sunday school materials for some of the streaming platforms for whatever money they can afford. And on the side, I'm trying to figure out how to crack the bigger nut of getting back to narrative storytelling for kids with a faith worldview.
In all your spare time. So, and it is a good question. So when someone says to you, walks up to Phil Vischer at the restaurant. We went to downtown Wheaton, had a nice restaurant, a nice goodbye dinner, as we all live in Wheaton, and so I'm headed out.
We cried, we hugged, we cried, we wept some more.
It was better than Cats. We'll see it again and again.
And then Ed was lifted up into the clouds as we waved to him.
Exactly. So someone walked up to you at our restaurant and said, "What do you do for a living?" What would you answer?
I don't know what to say anymore. I make stuff.
You make stuff. Okay.
I make podcasts and I make stuff for kids.
So let's talk about this turn to podcasting. So,
okay.
You of course launched, it was originally a Phil Vischer show. You renamed it to the Holy Post. You brought in co-hosts, and it's quite an enterprise now. I've been on it a couple times, and
it's an enterprise.
It is an enterprise. It is an enterprise. So, and this is not making, I mean, you have a huge audience, but you also irritate a lot of people. We're going to talk about why you do all of those things. So what made you get into commentary a lot of times in and around Christian space? Talk about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Before I launched Veggie Tales, I actually went to David C. Cook Publishers and pitched them on the idea, because my mom worked there at the time, and pitched them on the idea of a show like David Letterman for Christian teens.
No way.
Yes. And it was for me and Mike Naraki. I would be the David Letterman and Mike Naraki would be my sidekick, the Paul Schaefer, the Ed McMahon, whatever.
So awesome.
Because I was doing sketches in our church. I just loved being goofy. Sure. And I also grew up on David Letterman. He was kind of my, patron saint of sarcasm. And I thought, couldn't we make this Christian, this model Christian? And I thought, okay, we'll put out VHS tapes with this David Letterman-esque show for teenagers. And I pitched that at David C. Cook, and they said, teenagers don't buy VHS cassettes.
Right.
Like, okay, that's dead. And their response was, can you do something for children? And I was like, well, yeah, that's my ultimate goal, but it's too expensive. Right. And that's what led to trying to figure out Veggie Tales. So I've actually had this.
Veggie Tales is the children's thing, but Holy Post is basically your attempt to do David Letterman. This is helpful to know.
Kind of. Although
you need top 10 lists.
Although since then, I would say it was more Stephen Colbert would have been the model.
Okay, fair enough. Because the kids today don't even know who David Letterman is. Well, he's got that show now that's coming back with the long beard.
I'm not trying to sell him on David Letterman. That's definitely not in our pitch deck.
Yeah, good.
So then fast forward, post Veggies, And I am speaking more. I'm traveling to college campuses and speaking more. Sometimes we do Q&A on college campuses. And so I'm starting to get a feel for, the kids that grew up on VeggieTales, what are they wrestling with today? What are the questions that are coming up? And I'm also, as I'm doing more kids stuff, I'm driving. I have a little studio that's like 20 minutes from my house. As I drive back and forth, I listen to NPR, and I'm listening to how they're covering stories on NPR. And I'm having these little internal dialogues in my head of, wow, there's no real Christian angle to that story. If I was the guest on that, here's the angle I would want to bring to that.
Yeah.
And I like to think like that. And finally, I said to myself one day, Ed, I said to myself, I wonder if anyone else would want to listen to the conversations I'm having with myself in my car. And
it
so
appears they did.
I pitched to some friends, what if we tried to do a talk show?
Yeah.
And so I had a studio space.
Did you actually say the phrase talk show, not
Yes.
podcast?
No,
Okay,
talk
okay.
show. Talk
Okay.
show. And
Yeah.
we shot 4 pilot episodes of a talk show with a
Nice.
studio audience, with guests.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Our first guest was Eric Metaxas. Okay. We had some
Who's
other,
a former VeggieTales writer.
yeah, who was a former VeggieTales writer.
You guys still close today?
He blocked me
Okay.
on Twitter. We've become less close over time. 2016 was a bit of a watershed year
I can
that
see
separated. It was a cleaving. There was some cleaving within the evangelical world, and Mr. Metaxas and I were cloven. That's all I can say.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
We were cloven. Is that the correct?
Okay, so the first guest was Eric Metaxas.
First guest was Eric Metaxas, and then a Christian comedian that was a friend of mine, and a local Christian filmmaker. And then, I thought, okay, now let's shop this around. Like, who the heck do you shop that around to? So I said, hey, TBN, do you want a weird, and they said no. And then I realized that was kind of it. Once TBN said no.
Wait, let's go to number 2. No, there is no number 2.
But somebody said
NRB TV. So, there's that.
I talked to them early on, and they didn't have any money and didn't know what they were doing. Maybe they do now. I don't know. So anyway, I'm sitting there, and somebody suggested, well, since we're going to have these people in to do these pilots, what if we at the same time started a podcast and we could interview them on the podcast, which is why Eric Metaxas is also, I think, guest number 2 on the podcast. So that was 2012. We started doing a weekly podcast.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was the Phil Vischer podcast, because the talk show was going to be the Phil Vischer show. The Phil Vischer show never went anywhere, and the podcast didn't go anywhere for like 4 years. For a while it was, hey, VeggieTales fans, Phil's doing a podcast. Sometimes he does VeggieTales voices on it, and he tries to summarize each episode with a song at the end that he makes up on the spot, which sometimes goes horribly, but it's funny to listen to him fall apart. And so we had that podcast, or the VeggieTales fan audience. And then we got to 2016 and Donald Trump, and we woke up the next morning going, what the heck just happened? And started talking honestly about our concerns about 80% of white evangelicals supporting Donald Trump and what it meant for the church. And about half of our audience said, hey, I think we're done. But our audience started growing. And then it exploded when I did a couple of videos on race during the George Floyd summer to try to explain, just make a nice summary of racial history in North America. And that led to, like, the first one I made was watched 7 million times and went viral all over the internet. And that led to a bunch of people coming to the podcast and saying, hey, the creator of VeggieTales is woke. This is fantastic. And then about 2 weeks later, a bunch of people coming and saying, hey, the creator of VeggieTales is woke. And I realized that word had gone from a compliment to a pejorative in about 14 days. In the middle of the summer of George Floyd. So we ended up building a pretty substantial audience of pastors, ministry leaders, and then young Christians who were, I would say our target audience is the kid who grew up in the evangelical church who's now standing at the back door of the church saying, give me just one good reason not to walk out.
And are you giving them one good reason not to walk out? Are you?
Yes.
Because you are. I mean, let's talk some about that. Because what are you? Again, let me quote.
Do you know what the one good reason is? Do you know what the one good reason is, Ed?
What is it?
You're not alone.
Okay. So, because you originally did the video to, quote, walk people through history without bashing anyone's political party or calling them names, unquote. So, and the video really went everywhere. I mean, I probably had 10 people share it with me, and I was like, saw it. And
I was asking them too, would you share this with Ed? And would you also share this with Ed? I want him to think that this is really something.
So it was fascinating. And then of course it comes in waves. People like it, and then people critique it, then people want to correct it, and then people do this. And it's fascinating to watch, but it really helped frame a conversation for a lot of people. All right. So now, is your audience primarily disaffected, or I don't know what the right term would be, evangelicals?
No.
What word will you use? You must have had some conversation that this is our audience.
I'd say we have a fairly substantial ex-evangelical following, but it's not the majority.
Right.
And there are people who assume that, I think these guys are ex-evangelical because they're willing to critique evangelicalism.
Right, sure.
And can you do that from within without being cast out? And if you've been cast out, then aren't you ex-evangelical?
Yeah, sure.
And the reality is, no, you can critique from within. And we haven't been cast out. As far as we know, we're not sure who the official office of the casting is, but we're on good terms with Walter Kim and Russell Moore. So we figure if they're still okay with us, we must be at least.
For those who don't know, Walter Kim is the head of the National Association of Evangelicals. For those who don't know, Russell Moore is the editor-in-chief. I forget the exact title of Christianity Today. So those are those names.
Yes.
So, okay.
So like if they still like us and they're still willing to come on the show, so I feel like we're kind of trying to hold on to the evangelicalism of a John Stott, more of a thoughtful British, now semi-Anglican evangelicalism. Half the professors at Wheaton College are Anglican now. It's a really weird world we live in.
That is not actually true, but it has some truth to it.
There is some truth in it.
I actually had one of my amazing faculty. She's Assemblies of God, and she converted to start going to Anglican church. I'm like, no, we don't need more Anglicans.
We need diversity. We need ecumenical diversity. So you can tell when if you're interviewing someone and they say evangelical instead of evangelical.
Oh, there's truth to that. Yeah, that's a thing. That's
probably
really
Anglican.
Yeah, no, that's really a thing. Okay, so then you're sort of, it's not disaffected evangelicals, but you talk about that young evangelical who watch VeggieTales on the back door of the church, trying to say. So I say that you still have, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Are you an evangelical? Do you use that word to describe yourself?
That concludes the first part of our interview with Phil Vischer. Be sure to join us next week where Phil shares his thoughts on the current state of evangelicalism. You can learn more about Phil at ChurchLeaders.com. Be sure to check out his podcast, The Holy Post, at holypost.com. And thanks again for listening to the Stetzer Church Leader podcast. You can find more interviews as well as other great content for ministry leaders at ChurchLeaders.com/podcast. And again, if you found our conversation today helpful, we'd love for you to take a few moments to leave us a review. That'll help other ministry leaders find us and benefit from our content. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.